Fernando Alonso qualified in 16th at Paul Ricard, with McLaren teammate Stoffel Vandoorne 18th. Ignominy. That's just one word of many that could be chosen to describe a new low for McLaren in this Formula One season that is turning into a lesson in the perils of hubris for the team and, in particular, their bosses. Fernando Alonso, arguably the greatest driver of his generation, and certainly one of them, starts the French Grand Prix down in 16th place on the grid. Very disappointing, said racing director Eric Bleer, who not for the first time this year did not attend the team's post-qualifying news conference. 2 places ahead of his teammate Stoffel Vandoorne. It is not only McLaren's worst qualifying performance of the year, it was the worst since last year's Azerbaijan Grand Prix, when their former engine supplier Honda was still in the grips of the agonizingly unreliable start to the 2017 season that persuaded McLaren to split with them. The decision to cut loose from a factory Honda partnership and choose instead to become a Renault customer came at a net loss of close to $100 million. But it would be worth it, McLaren's bosses claimed. The chassis, they said, was one of the best on the grid, and by changing engine they would be able to compete this year with fellow Renault customer Red Bull, for podiums and even perhaps the occasional win. Instead, they are a massive 1.7 seconds off Red Bull's pace on average in qualifying. And that is, to state the obvious, all in the car. Hamilton on pole for French Grand Prix podcast. French GP qualifying review. Horner would be surprised if Ricciardo left Red Bull raise a glass to F1's return to Paul Ricard. Self-evidently, either last year's McLaren genuinely was that good, and they have made a dog's dinner of this year's car. Then, one of 2 things can be concluded. Or McLaren's analysis of its own performance was as woeful as the car itself, and they made a dog's dinner of both machines. Most would plump for the latter. McLaren continue to insist that they have no regrets about the Honda-Renault decision, even after Red Bull have now decided to go the other way for the next 2 seasons. Yes, the management have cost the shareholders a vast amount of cash, but as they are the Bahraini government and a Saudi billionaire, they can afford it. But the engine is not the point. The issue is what on earth is going on at McLaren the team. There has been a diverting little story this weekend courtesy of the Daily Mail's Jonathan McAvoy, who extensively quoted an unnamed source saying unflattering things about the McLaren management and criticizing their penchant for handing out chocolate bars as a reward for working long hours. McLaren's bosses have tried to shrug it off as a disaffected employee, not reflective of the general mood. Alonso's up and down week, from the high of a Le Mans win, to the low of another F1 qualifying disappointment, we have had an overwhelming amount of support from everyone inside McLaren. It has actually kind of rallied the troops, Chief Executive Officer Zak Brown said. I think it is a very small group of individuals, and by no means representative of the wider group at McLaren. Brown said the car's performance was frustrating but insisted, we will get it right. He says the problems with the car are aerodynamic but don't show up in the wind tunnel. So we can't replicate them in the wind tunnel, so we have to try to rectify them on the track. That analysis raises questions about the very fundamentals of McLaren's design process, and about how the team might possibly be able to fix a problem the causes of which it cannot identify. Getting a Renault engine this year has meant McLaren no longer have anywhere to hide. They are directly compared with Red Bull and the Renault Works team, and they are falling well short, regardless of the fact that Alonso's unstinting excellence has so far rescued them on Sundays. He is up in 7th in the Drivers' Championship and the team 5th in the Constructors, despite his car breaking down in the last 2 races. Media playback is not supported on this device. How does it feel to drive an F1 car at Paul Ricard? Since it became apparent just how far off the pace they had fallen. McLaren have been undertaking an internal investigation into their technical structure. The first results of that saw the departure of Tim Goss, the chief technical officer, before the Baku race in April. And Brown promoted to CEO with responsibility for the race team, from his mostly commercial previous role. Since then, Brown has brought in former IndyCar champion Gilda Ferran, Honda's F1 sporting director for a couple of years in the mid-2000s, as a roving advisor. The Brazilian has been keeping a low profile, but has attended every race since Spain early last month, with the remit to offer advice and opinion on whatever areas he sees fit. Meanwhile, the pressure is building massively on Bleer, who set up the technical structure that is under review. The Frenchman has been asked in both Canada and France whether he should resign. He said that he wouldn't. The jungle drums in the paddock are suggesting Bleer might not last much longer. Whether that is the problem or even the solution is a different matter. McLaren need a technical director of the highest level, and a real shake-up, if this famous name is not to continue an already worrying decline. Alonso continues to emphasize the positives. But what he really makes of driving a car so far below his capabilities, with a decision about his future to make in the next few months, can only be imagined. A star is born, Leclerc said after qualifying 8th that Friday's practice sessions were a disaster and the Sauber team changed the car completely while one great star's career is in danger of fizzling out in what can only be described as a very sad and depressing manner. Charles Leclerc is a member of the Ferrari Driver Academy and he is driving for Sauber this year to learn the ropes in F1 away from the spotlight. A new one appears to have burst onto the scene. The 20-year-old Monegasque arrived in F1 with high expectations on him, having excelled in the junior categories. But the spotlight is well and truly on him now. But it's always hard to judge a driver until he arrives in F1, where the pressure is so much higher, and the competition so much tougher and more intense. Many fall by the wayside, but every now and again someone comes along who looks a bit special, who finds a way to shine, no matter the quality of his car. Leclerc is doing exactly what Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna and Alonso did in their first seasons, taking an average, or worse, car and making it do unexpected things. Michael Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton also all gave notice of great talent from the moment they arrived. But the cars they had were more competitive. Not so Prost, in 1980 when McLaren were in the doldrums, Senna and Tillman in the early stages of 1984, or Alonso and Aminardi in 2001. Ayrton Senna finished 9th in his first season in F1 with Tillman. Leclerc had already impressed by scoring points in Baku, Spain and Canada, and leaving teammate Marcus Ericsson, no superstar, but no mug either, in his dust. But France is proving something else again. Leclerc got the Sauber into the top 10 qualifying shootout for the first time this year, in the process setting a lap nearly 0.8 seconds quicker than Ericsson, who admittedly was on the back foot after missing second practice following a heavy crash in the first session. Leclerc is now 6-2 up on Ericsson in qualifying, at an average of nearly 0.7 seconds. The two he was behind were in the first couple of races of the season, when the young man was finding his feet and making errors. Ferrari always intended for Leclerc to graduate to the senior team at some point, as long as he proved himself. Before this weekend, sources close to the team said that, while a decision had not been made between him and Kimi Räikkönen, it was 65-35 or so in Leclerc's favor. Saturday, which saw yet another error-strewn performance from Räikkönen in final qualifying, can only have consolidated that view. Leclerc is looking more and more like Vettel's teammate at Ferrari in 2019. And if you were Vettel, four-time champion though you are, you might be just a little bit worried about that. Who will win in France? Choose your top 3 drivers from the list below. First 1, second 2, third 3. Confirm selection. The fight for the race when Lewis Hamilton always looked favorite for pole in France. From the moment he overcame a difficult start to the weekend with a lap that put him fastest in first practice. He also topped second practice, by 0.7 seconds. Pole was duly delivered, but by less than 0.2 seconds over teammate Valtteri Bottas, who had been compromised by missing much of second practice. There was time left on the table, he said. And Hamilton was a little rueful. I am grateful for the opportunity to be on pole, but I left 0.3 seconds on the table and there is not one driver who would be happy with that much time left on the table. Hamilton is now determined to convert his first pole since Spain into a win and reclaim the championship lead that Vettel took back by a point with victory in Canada. "I need it. On paper, he should walk it. I want this one so bad," Hamilton said. Not only does he appear to have the fastest car, but he is on what looks to be a better strategy than Vettel. Mercedes, and the Red Bulls, which qualified 4th and 5th, will start on the more durable super soft tires, while Ferrari have gone for the ultra softs. The ultras have a smidge more grip initially, but the pace difference is very small and the degradation on them is higher. Vettel sounds confident, though. "It is fair to say we were a couple of tenths slower," he said after qualifying, "but in the race I think we have a good chance. In race trim the car should be fine." All weekend the talk has been about the track layout not encouraging overtaking. About why organizers and the FIA did not choose to homologate the version of the track without a chicane in the famous Mistral Straight. So much so that the drivers proposed it in their briefing on Friday. But all may not be lost yet. "It's not the best place to overtake," Vettel said, "but that is not necessarily detrimental to a good race or bad race. I am open-minded. We'll see what the day brings."